Good morning. It is Wednesday, September 29th, and I want to turn our attention to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of what happened in 1921 when a very, very wealthy Black neighborhood was ravished and destroyed completely, all because of a misunderstanding and false accusations of a Black man claiming that he harmed a white woman. And we've heard this story so many times when we research and look in the history of this nation. But in Tulsa, what was so unique is the Black economy that was so developed and that was thriving. In fact, some historians say $200 million in today's worth was taken from that community. And I had the opportunity to go to Tulsa for the centennial, the 100-year anniversary earlier this year. And the survivors of the Tulsa Massacre are still fighting for reparations. They're still fighting to be compensated for their homes that were destroyed. 1,200 homes were destroyed. They're still fighting for compensation for their businesses that were destroyed. And yesterday, there was a court hearing, where the survivors of that massacre went in and asked a judge to consider the evidence that they were able to bring forth that would allow them to file reparations against the city of Tulsa. I want you guys to take a look at the latest coverage.
Civil and human rights lawyers will fight to keep a landmark lawsuit alive in court.
Hey, good morning, guys. A lawsuit filed by a group of Oklahomans is seeking reparations for the devastation caused by the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Last night, a rally was held in support of that lawsuit. Attorneys for the plaintiffs will appear in court to defend motions to dismiss the case. Solomon Simmons has been critical of Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum for not supporting reparations in the past. The city does not comment on ongoing litigation. The lawsuit calls for monetary compensation and admission for the defendants that they created a public nuisance.
Asking that the judge allows us to move forward in discovery. That's first and foremost. We're asking for a declaration that this indeed is a public nuisance. We're asking for the judge to abate, which means to fix. So we're asking her to allow us to prove our case, show the evidence.
In a statement, the Justice for Greenwood Foundation said when no legal action is taken against acts of racial terror, that gives permission for it to happen again. Now, today's hearing is scheduled for 10 a.m. this morning. That's when they'll decide whether to move forward with the lawsuit or dismiss it altogether.
Black Wall Street, was about 35 blocks. 35 city blocks full of Black homes, Black businesses. It's now reduced to about a 1 or 2 block radius. And it is actually split by a highway. You know, when I went to Tulsa, it was shortly after the Derek Chauvin trial and the protest for Dante Wright, which was a very, very challenging time. And for some reason, I thought the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre was going to connect me with people who were advocates for Black economics. Somehow I thought that going to Tulsa was going to recharge me and revitalize me. In fact, I left infuriated because of the gentrification that has happened in the historic Greenwood district, because the fact that there were all of these events that were planned around the centennial, yet and still the survivors are still seeking reparations. The fact that you can charge for an event to celebrate the centennial of the Tulsa Massacre, but none of the proceeds are going to the survivors. It felt very exploitative. And when you see the elders here in this coverage, these are elders who have dedicated their entire lives to fighting for reparations for the residents, the Black residents of Tulsa. And so, as we talk about the move for racial justice, we also must talk about the move for economic justice. Tulsa is just one example. It's probably the most well-known example But these massacres happened across our country, in Detroit, in Chicago, and so many other cities. And so we can't stand here today, 100 years later, and say that we're changed if we can't unify on this history. Some historians have counted up to 300 people being killed on that 1921 day. And so if we know that not only was this a horrific act against a prominent, wealthy Black community, but we also know the cover up that happened to ensure that those people were not able to be to rebuild, or their descendants were not able to be compensated for the destruction that they were plagued with. The fact that for many, many decades, this history was known as a race riot. It was classified as a race riot, so that the descendants and the survivors couldn't go to insurance brokers and be compensated for what happened. There is a line in most insurance policies that prohibit compensation in a riot. And so it was a loophole. But we know that that's not what it was. And to hear the stories, too, to get closer to this history, I don't know, for those of you watching, how closely you've gotten to the history of what happened in Tulsa, but there were a few businesses that really stood out. There was one prominent hotel owner, Black hotel owner, whose hotel was destroyed, and he actually ended up being arrested, that some predicted could have catapulted with his company, a hotel like the Hyatt, or, any of these hotels that we see, the chain hotels that we see everywhere, the Holiday Inn, the Marriott, right? Because that was the type of service that he provided at his hotel. And that was also the business savvy that he had. So when we look at Tulsa, knowing that they're still fighting for justice, there are ways to support. If you know people in Oklahoma, reach out and see what you can do. But we're going to follow this hearing. The hearing was yesterday, and now the judge is deliberating on what he's going to decide to do. But this potentially could open up the door for residents to be able to sue the city for reparations, which would be a huge step forward for economic justice for those who were affected.